And I'm sorry, Alex, are you verifying that?
I think sorry to niggle on the details. I think we might be missing one attendee, Howard from Ava. And so, Josh, if I understand correctly, we need to wait, and it may help if I text him to get that public site open.
Yes, please. We do need to wait till they join, and yeah, please text.
And just a point of order, it sounds like if we lose Mitch at 1:45, Chair Mitchell, you might want to think about prioritizing the voting items, maybe potentially, just to make sure we get through that.
Yeah, I apologize. I just need to move meeting rooms. I can rejoin shortly after that, but
And Chair, we do have all meeting locations, so we can get started.
Okay. Well, let's see if we can get through this in 45 minutes. Okay, on to item 2, verification of a quorum.
So
Alex, sorry, I didn't hear you, Alex.
it's verified. We have 9 board members. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to move on to public comment. So any member of the public that is wanting to address the board on an item that is not on the agenda. And I see Eric.
Madam Chair, would you like me to unmute him so that he can speak at this time?
Yes, please. Yes.
Mr. Vallum, you should be able to speak now.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Eric Vium, and I'm speaking today on behalf of the CCA Workforce and Environmental Justice Alliance. I hope you're all doing well. I'm glad to see you. My intent in providing public comment for you today is with respect to the 2025 Clean Generation and Capacity RFP and a letter that I sent to General Manager, or that we sent to General Manager Morris just an hour or so ago. I just want to read it for your awareness and so that's in the record, and so your awareness if you have any communications from your CCAs around this. So the subject is around alignment of CC Power's procurement approach with member CCA standards. And here's the letter. We want to begin by recognizing the substantial leadership many CC Power member CCAs have shown in adopting strong workforce, community engagement, and environmental standards over the past few years. Because a majority of CCAs have now moved to higher road policies, including prioritizing project labor agreements with local and targeted hire goals, commitments to workers with barriers to entry, and clearer expectations for community engagement and environmental stewardship, we reviewed the 2025 Clean Generation and Capacity RFP with the expectation that these standards would be meaningfully reflected. Instead, the RFP contains no references to these member adopted standards and does not incorporate them into eligibility requirements, quantitative scoring, or proposal expectations. Labor standards are limited to a pass-fail IRA test with no scoring encouraging PLAs or other criteria such as local or targeted hire, and community engagement and community benefits are absent. This structure sits in tension with CC Power's commitment, as previously stated, that the agency will not undermine any member's CCA policies and will default to the higher of the standards when member requirements differ. Given this, we respectfully ask that CC Power begin aligning its procurement framework with the higher road standards adopted by most of its members, and that staff bring forward an approach for embedding these expectations into future solicitations. We request an opportunity to meet with you and your team after this RFP round to discuss a path that upholds the commitments made to member agencies and provides consistent guidance to developers participating in CC Power procurements. That's the end of the letter. Again, I appreciate the time to read this to the directors and look forward to follow up with General Manager Morris about a meeting to discuss.
Okay. Thank you, Eric. Okay, we are on to item number 5, which is our consent agenda. And I will entertain a motion unless there's any discussion on this.
Motion approval.
Second.
Great.
Public comment.
So we'd like to take a vote.
Public comment.
Ava Community Energy,
Yes.
Co Community Energy,
Yes.
Clean Power San Francisco,
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power Authority,
Yes.
Valley Clean Energy.
Yes.
That motion passed unanimously.
Great. So we are on to our regular agenda, and the first item is our strategic planning refresh update. General Manager Morris, I think you have a few slides.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Chair Mitchell, I'm happy to just share what we've presented today and then would hand it back to you to walk through any materials. Is that okay?
Yep.
Thank you to everybody for your participation in the in-person meeting in October, where we worked to identify if consensus or near consensus exists on updated strategic priorities. The materials you see before you and also in the board packet attempt to capture that information as well as we could, although the plan is to present that today for review with an idea that it could be that the board adopts these updated strategic priorities in December or thereafter, and also that we would then be directed, we as staff would be directed to update the strategic plan with appropriate milestones or other implementation criteria so that the strategic priorities, the new ones, are reflected in the go forward plan, probably from 2026 to 2030. So that's how we structured it, working with the ad hoc committee, and I look forward to hearing the discussion. Thank you, Chair Mitchell.
Great. Any member have any discussion on this item? So I will just, sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I just wanted to appreciate that we can have another month. Having not been there, I'd like the time. So I'm grateful this wasn't a voting item today. That's all. Just wanted to express appreciation.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jeff. And I definitely want to appreciate the ad hoc committee. I know there was a lot of time and effort that went into this, and the members of the board that were at the retreat. I think it's great to have clear guidance for CC Power coming into the next year, and standardizing on those 3 priorities, I think will really help the organization move forward and be in alignment with the board's highest priorities. So any other member wanting to speak on this item? Any further discussion today? Any additional information that would help when we vote on this next week?
If I may, Chair Mitchell, it might help if we review 2 slides really quickly, and I'm sorry if I skipped over those. Is it possible to just bring those up as a quick summary for the board today? So Stephanie, if possible, please bring up slide 6. So at the member forum, there was a lot of discussion about how many priorities, how do we scope CC Power correctly, and are we talking on the same page about what each priority means? There's also notes to keep a lot of what's established, particularly the phasing and the opt-in ability for each member to choose what joint action project fits them. So if we could go to the next slide, please, Stephanie. The highest level summary of the strategic priorities would be that the offsite identified 3 priorities. What you see in front of you is 4, but I want to just quickly explain that the 4th one is really just a continuation of the earlier priority to make sure our initial tranche of power projects come online. So that would be captured under the bottom here, number 4. And so that's really still this priority of implementing the existing phase 3 project agreements. So working with the ad hoc, it was identified that this still is a critical priority for CC Power. And so it made sense to have that standalone, although in some ways you could nest that 4th priority under priority 1 here, which is procurement and contract management of wholesale resources. I want to just clarify that in case it's confusing, but I think the direction I've heard is that it's so important to try to make sure these initial projects come online that we wanted to have that as a standalone priority. The other two just were labeled as explore, and that's really about procuring emerging higher risk and unusual technologies or projects, and then own, and really looking at member CCA power asset ownership efforts and trying to facilitate that on behalf of members. So those were the sort of high level wording we captured for the big three, now the big four. And then the last point I wanted to speak to also from the member forum was it might be challenging for board members to approve of this without any visibility to what it means from a budget or cost standpoint. So Stephanie, if we could move to the next slide, some preliminary thinking that I wanted to share was that in looking at the idea of implementing these strategic priorities, if adopted, we foresee no budget changes for the current fiscal year and relatively light or no budget changes for future years. And that's because the strategic priorities that have been presented today really align with the core competencies we've been developing within CC Power. And for adding capabilities, a lot of that would be done upon further review. A good example would be understanding operations and maintenance should there ever be an ownership opportunity that makes sense for members. So it's hard to forecast, but it would really be any future costs would probably be captured within the project specific opportunity costs that members would consider. And so I feel this is a healthy sense of where things would go on the implementation side, and I wanted to share and speak to that and provide an opportunity for any discussion today. The last piece is that given that we'd be trying to implement these new priorities, from my standpoint, it might make sense to have an ad hoc committee on the budget maybe starting in January, so that we are working very closely with a committee of the board in making sure that we're designing a budget that they feel implements the priorities effectively. And as some of you know, implementing these budgets can be time consuming. And so it probably makes sense to use an ad hoc for that.
Great, thanks, Alex. And if you could go back to slide 6. Alex, I was also hoping you could provide a little bit of detail on, I think there was a good discussion at the board retreat on the procurement and the explore, and, within those 2 areas, where we wanted CC Power to focus. If you could provide a little bit more color on that, that would be great.
Yes, great point. We tried hard to delineate what would be in scope for the procure priority, and also the explore priority as well. Some of these are detailed in a fairly lengthy document in the memo. It's viewed as a draft document now, but we did include these scopes for what we mean here. Under the procure bucket, there would be compliance-oriented procurement that members want. So there could be solicitations that help members achieve compliance products or projects that they need. In some instances, this could include what we occasionally spoke to as bread and butter projects, but it would really need to be on a project specific or procurement specific basis, how it's defined. And then along with the procure comes the contract management side of it. So some resources with negotiations, contract management, settlements, et cetera. So that's how we define that. And then the explore bucket, by contrast, was defined as a sort of challenging, higher risk or unusual technologies that probably would not fit within the procure bucket. A good example would be within the geothermal power generation portfolio, there might be projects that are procure because they're straightforward and you could just go run a solicitation and contract for them. There also could be some technologies for geothermal which are more in the explore bucket, and that's because they have higher risks, are less proven, maybe are harder to understand at this time or harder to contract for. And so we would categorize them under the explore bucket. And so that's how we tried to define it. And I would welcome board members to review some of the specific wording we used in the memo and document, and let us know if you see anything of concern.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I'll just add, some of the discussion at the retreat around the procure was just specifically, we didn't want CC Power to be procuring, what we would call bread and butter projects that all of us, kind of do on our own, but more complicated projects, larger projects where, you need multiple off-takers, something like that. And then for the emerge, I heard a lot of support around alternative technologies for long duration storage. So just encourage other board members, to provide that detail. I think the more clarity that we can provide CC Power, the better. And Barbara, I see your hand up.
Yes, thank you for recognizing me. In the interest of time, I just want to suggest some of what you're saying, Chair Mitchell, is sort of the sentiment I heard at the retreat about things, about emphasis and things that we don't want CC Power to pursue. I didn't see that captured as much in the draft. And maybe it doesn't belong in the draft, but it belongs somewhere. So I'd just like the committee and the staff to consider that as they go through the drafting process. Thank you.
Yeah, agree. Monica.
Yes, also thank you to CC Power staff and to the ad hoc committee for getting us to where we are right now. I think this is definitely kind of a step in the right direction, echoing kind of what Director Hale said. There was just some elements of the discussion that we had at the retreat that I don't see here as well. And I know there's a whole discussion somewhere else. I don't know if it was in this packet or where I saw it, on the use of MOU process to do origination. And that's one that I know that we had a lot of discussion around in terms of how that fits with what we want to do in the future. And I know that could be different than what we've done in the past, but I want to see an element of that also brought into the discussion or the strategic plan going forward. And then the other thing is, and we didn't really talk about this much at the forum, unfortunately, and maybe it wraps up into the budget part of it, but I think it's really important for us to be very kind of deliberate on how we're going to develop CC Power in terms of the organization, the staff, the governance, and where maybe it's a priority, maybe it's not a priority, maybe it's much more tactical, but just how we have these goals of what we want to do or these focus, but how are we actually going to do it? Is it through hiring people? Is it through leveraging sweat equity with the members? Is it through consultants? What is it? How does that look, and who's looking at that? And is it only going to be evaluated or assessed during the budget process? That's it.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. Okay, any other discussion on this item? Okay, I'm going to go to public comment. Any member of the public wanting to comment on this item? Okay, I'm not seeing any. And this is not a voting item, so I think we are on to item number 6B, which is authorization for purchase of a price forecast and valuation tool for CC Power. So I'll pass it back to you, General Manager Morris.
Thank you, board. Thank you, Chair Mitchell. So we currently have a solicitation underway, and as part of completing the solicitation, we will need power price forecast and evaluation tool. The staff's going to do most of the work, but what we did want to purchase, and this is in line with the budget, is the data sets for energy prices in various ways in various regions that help us, some of which would be nodal, and then a specific valuation tool for use in guiding and producing some of the analytical material that we'll use for shortlisting. So what we have before you is a resolution 251101 to approve this purchase in the next month, probably with a not to exceed of $150,000. And this is matches what's in the budget. We will, of course, try to procure for the most cost reasonable solution. And we have identified a preferred vendor for this. So what we need now is board approval.
Okay, any questions or discussions by board members? Yes, Monica. We can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. Just out of curiosity, did staff consider utilizing existing data sets, platforms from an existing member before going out and as part of the evaluation of buying this on your own?
Philippe, would you queue up a little bit on our process for identifying candidate data sets, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Director Padilla. We are generally prohibited from using staff or member-specific contracted forecasts due to confidentiality provisions within members' own contracts with those vendors. So for that purpose, we conducted our own solicitation process to identify price forecast vendors that we could use for our own purposes, as well as valuation tools that we were able to implement. We did go through a rigorous process to evaluate whether we would be able to do the valuation in-house as opposed to being utilizing a third-party tool, and ultimately decided that it gave us the best solution set to be able to process the large number of offers that we expect from this RFP, and greater redundancy to use a third party so that we can both process this RFP, get greater assessment of the potential stochastic outcomes for the forecasts associated with variations in market prices that we might expect, which are things that we would not be able to do in-house, which would be more of a deterministic modeling approach. And so ultimately, the vendor that we have preferred at this point gives us the opportunity to expand upon the existing price forecast that we already have through existing subscriptions, get a better perspective, particularly for energy arbitrage pricing for batteries and other storage resources, and look at the diverse potential range of valuations that might result. And so we feel like we've selected ultimately what is a tool and set of price forecasts that best allows us to make recommendations to your staffs in order to shortlist projects and help narrow down the range of potential selections that ultimately your staff will advise us upon their preferences to pick up out of the solicitation.
Okay. And so as I understand, the request is for a 1-year subscription at for amount not to exceed $150,000. Is that correct?
Correct.
And does that arrangement come with consulting hours as well?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'll make them. Well, I guess we have to go to comments, public comments first. Otherwise, I was going to make a motion.
We do. Any other questions on this item discussion? Yeah, Howard.
I'm sorry if I missed this in the discussion or in the materials, but I don't see it. Did you share who the vendor is and those types of details?
No, we did not share that in the interest of being able to ultimately negotiate the best possible deal, subject to the approval authority of the manager, general manager.
Got it. Okay. And maybe I'll just comment that I understand, obviously, you want a further negotiation potentially before disclosing that information and completing some of the RFP process. I'm interested in knowing, as a general process standpoint, whether we should look to advance vendor selections a little further before taking things to the board, depending on the timing of where that sits relative to the board meeting. So if it's critical that this contract is signed in the next couple of weeks, and we don't want to wait until, say, a December meeting, certain circumstances that certainly makes sense. But generally speaking, ideal to advance things further along to be able to disclose some of that information to the board, so we sort of know what we're voting on and perhaps some of the contract structures involved there. In the absence of that, having that reviewed with either officers or an ad hoc committee may be useful. I don't know that that's necessary for this particular set of services, but just wanted to flag that maybe as a general request to Alex and staff for future consideration.
Yeah, in this circumstance, we are receiving offers on December 5th and looking to initiate the evaluations, the quantitative evaluations shortly thereafter. And so we would need a evaluation tool, vendor and price forecast in advance of the next board meeting. So there was some urgency around that. We have initial drafts of the contract underway, but we don't have final terms agreed to, which was part of the sensitivity.
Director Chang, point well taken. We were close, but as Philippe indicated, there was some urgency and timing. Part of the solicitation is for RPS eligible resources. And so our project plan is to really get a lot of the work done in December. And since the next board meeting is not until December, mid-December, we felt it was not appropriate to wait and it would set the project back. If I may, Chair Mitchell, I think Director Padilla also raised a good point that I think if this resolution gets passed, I'll still further vet and check on the idea of working with member subscriptions where appropriate, but in line with what Director Padilla suggested, we can check that again. And I think it's possible for the board to still approve this. And then we can still check and proceed or not proceed depending on what we find.
Okay. Any other questions, discussion before we go to public comment? Okay, any member of the public wanting to comment on this item? And raise your hand. Okay, I am not seeing any, so we're back to the board, and if anyone wants to make a motion.
Move approval.
Second.
Great. So Stephanie, can we do the voting?
The Community Energy,
Yes.
Central Coast Community Energy,
Oh, I'm sorry. I voted on behalf of Howard, I think.
Great, Rob, you can vote on my behalf. No, just I vote yes.
Okay. I
Thank you.
also do. So that's the first
thank
two.
you. Clean Power San Francisco,
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power Authority.
I'll say yes, but I think Howard's point about this being premature really hit home for me. So I just encourage staff to look at what other options you might have in an emergency, and maybe we need a policy to delegate a little more authority for you to act on a short-term basis. So I'll say yes.
Valley Clean Energy.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Right. Well, with that, we are on to item 6C, which is our non-project working capital policy. And I know that our treasurer Mitch has worked very hard on this along with our general manager. So I want to recognize both of you for getting us to this point. So Alex, do you want to kick this off or is it Mitch?
Sure, Treasurer Sears, shall I kick it off? Happy to defer to you as appropriate.
Take it away, Alex.
Okay, thank you. So CC Power has not had a formal policy for working capital, and going back a few years, really was had moments that required cash calls mid-cycle. When I first started, the first budget we passed in 2023, we started to generally in an ad hoc basis through budget approvals increase the amount of working capital, but there wasn't a clear board approved goal. We were taking it 1 year at a time as part of the budget process. And there was always a question and I think some guidance about how do we limit the amount of working capital CC Power has. It was never the intent of CC Power or the founders of CC Power for this organization to hold too much money that's not being useful. So we wanted to find the right level of working capital that we should be collecting pursuant to the board's direction, but not over collecting. One related piece we've discussed also is that CC Power lacked a policy for how excess funds left over at the end of the year are treated. Should those be rolled back to members or should we apply some of those towards the working capital goals? And so the policy you see before you does that. It really tries to take a narrow approach and a minimalist approach to defining working capital to make sure we're not over collecting or over holding working capital. And then it still provides this goal, but that goal then feeds back to the budget approval process every year. So every year the board will know what the target is that's already been approved, but have authority to deviate from that within the budget. And I think from my standpoint, operating CC Power, this certainly helps us manage the working capital needs of the organization and will smooth out this ongoing question we have every year in the budget process of how much should we try to retain. I think a benefit here also is that we're well on our way to achieving the working capital goal as established in this policy. And what that probably means is that in terms of the amount of working capital needs that are added into the G&A cost every year, that would likely be flat for this year. And that'll, of course, depend on where we land at the end of the year. But I wanted to signal that I recognize we want to try and keep the G&A down as much as possible. And so having this policy now seems useful for that purpose as well. Treasurer Sears, thank you for the chance to work with you and for all of your helpful insights in developing this. Is there anything you thought the board should know as well?
No, I think you covered it well. I think that this is from the work that we did with Alex and his team. The objective here was to just get a basic policy in place so that the organization could move forward on this item. So turn it back to you.
Okay, great. Any other questions or discussion on this item? Yeah, Rob.
Thank you, Chair Mitchell. Director Sears, Alex, I think really good job around creating a framework that sort of works both immediately sort of as we're working through this. A couple of things that I would just encourage us to think about as we move forward with the policy is one, the controls issue, identifying, and Alex, I think the assumption here is that you're a GM and you're responsible, but as CC Power sort of builds out additional staff, who specifically is going to be responsible within the agency for monitoring and implementing the policy, that the policy and working capital itself is subject to the audit. I think those things are understood in the structure that's here. But I also think a little bit of thinking about what isn't working capital. So, no one-time revenues, no short-term revenues should be utilized as part of working capital. Just good sort of fiscal discipline around those issues. And then I would encourage us at a point, especially as projects start coming online, to really think about and map the revenue and cash cycle through CC Power, because that's going to help inform what that working capital policy needs to be in future years, as you're thinking about sort of just how much money, credit postings, collateral postings, those sorts of things that you need the working capital for. So thank you for all of this work. I think this is a great foundation, and just those are a couple of points that I would just encourage us to keep thinking about as you continue thinking about how to add structure and robustness to the agency's cash controls.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Barbara.
I just have two quick questions. One is sort of on the implementation end, and that is, are you thinking that this question of whether to of how to allocate what might be considered excess would occur in the context of the budget? So it's sort of like on an annual cycle?
Yes, and we're talking about non-project funds, so it's really the leftover G&A or phase one dollars. We typically don't know that until we close the fiscal year, of course, but by the time we tend to be asking for budget approval for the upcoming year, we have pretty good visibility to it. And so it would be within the budget vote every year that we would say, here's our forecast working capital, here's what we think we would need to meet this target, and here's the sort of incremental amount we recommend embedding or adding into the G&A. And that's how the board would get visibility to it every year. And to Director Shaw's point, this is really the non-project working capital. So it's a pretty small part of the CC Power budget. And each project may have its own working capital requirements that we're implementing through our contract management work. And so we're really differentiating just the non-project side and what qualifies for working capital use there versus the projects, which are, I think, probably where more dollars will be broadly.
Right. And then my other question is just to make sure I'm looking at the complete proposed policy. I only just noticed that attachment A to the resolution on its second page begins with a section B, as in boy, but I couldn't find a section A. Is this being inserted into a document, or was that just a typo?
I believe that's a typo in the
Okay,
section
good.
A was definitions and section B is the policy itself.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, any other discussion on this item before we go to public comment? Okay, so we'll go to public comment. Any member of the public wanting to comment on this item can raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I think we can vote, or I'm sorry, we need a motion first and a second.
I can make the motion with one quick correction. I think the resolution might have the wrong year on it. 24/11/02, should it be, whereas
Yes. Yeah.
I actually thank Richard for that one, but he's got the eagle eyes, but just I'll make the motion with that small correction. Thank you.
So Josh, can we make the motion with that amendment?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Great, good catch. Thank you. Is there a second?
Janovic second.
Great. Okay, so I think we're ready to vote.
Ava Community Energy,
Yes.
Central Coast Community Energy,
Yes.
Clean Power San Francisco,
Yes.
Peninsula Clean Energy,
Yes.
Redwood Coast Energy Authority,
Yes.
San Jose Clean Energy,
Yes.
Silicon Valley Clean Energy,
Yes.
Sonoma Clean Power Authority,
Yes.
Valley Clean Energy.
Yes.
That motion passed unanimously.
Great. So now we are on to item 6D, which is an update on the geothermal strategic origination. So I'll pass it to you, General Manager Morris.
Okay,
And-
thank you. I'll continue.
Sorry, Alex, before you begin, Lori, I'm going to go ahead and switch to a different room. I'll rejoin here in a minute.
Great, thank you.
So we wanted the opportunity to update the board on this ongoing phase 2A project. As many of you know, the purpose of this project is to yield binding opportunities to procure geothermal. And we developed this strategic origination approach in conjunction with many of your staff who have seen that finding the right geothermal bids has been challenging in this market for a couple of reasons. And so before I start, I just wanted to acknowledge the CC Power staff who've worked intently on this for several months, and then also your teams who have been engaged through a project advisory subcommittee to help us shape it, develop our approach, and also come up with opportunities that members have expressed high interest in. And so I wanted to give a quick background on the process, and then I think it would be appropriate, Chair Mitchell, for us to focus on some of the implementation strategies we're embedding in this and have board discussion on that at that time. Is that okay?
That'd be great.
Okay. So the background here was that through normal solicitations, we had not seen geothermal bids. And so working with members, we said, how can we help you come up with, how can we help you find geothermal bids through a competitive process that are compelling and useful for your portfolios. So in addition to working bilaterally, we also came up with this geothermal strategic origination phase 2. We've originally discussed this in spring, and all 9 members joined on to the phase 2. As a phase 2, which is really the process of soliciting or finding bids and then getting them close to final so members can decide if they want to join. We broke this one into a phase 2A where you don't know the specific project opportunity just yet, and the 2B would be when we get a specific project opportunity. Only interested members would move into the 2B process to fund that negotiation and finalization effort. This approach, however, was that we tried to understand why are we not getting the bids, and there was really 2 criteria. One was that there's scarce contract-ready geothermal supply. There's limited import capacity rights blocking some of the supply from being relevant, and then many of the emerging technologies are in pilot stage, and so or have long permitting timelines, so the bids weren't quite ripe. And so we thought, well, we could wait, but the members are interested in seeing opportunities now. And so we came up with this strategic origination approach where we use an RFI to get a portfolio of developers who are serious about development, who are moving things forward, but may not be in a position to bid today. Hence, they hadn't bid in our past solicitations. And then working with that through evaluation, we would select a few and in the right legal structures, essentially contract with them or collaborate with them so that we're in a good position to yield a binding opportunity. And so our initial RFI yielded about 2,000 megawatts of geothermal capacity. So it was exciting to see that sort of being offered into the RFI. And then through the shortlist, we landed with three candidate developers or sites, and specifically about 500 megawatts of potential capacity. We selected these very strategically, working with your members. We were looking for sites that could inform or feed into or yield California-based geothermal, sites that would help us and our members work with some of the modern geothermal technologies, specifically advanced geothermals versus enhanced geothermal. And then also we had one that's bringing artificial intelligence and machine learning into the site identification process. And so for all these reasons, we felt we were bringing a relatively diverse portfolio of projects that could be viable, but we're facing some early stage development challenges and weren't quite ready yet. So the approach, and this is ultimately what I'd love feedback on, was, and we thought about this, how do we work with this developer to ultimately get binding opportunities? And we understand that our main job is to do procurements in these solicitations and not to assist developers per se, but since there was a dearth of opportunities in the market, we tried to explore with these developers how we could collaborate and whether that would yield exclusivity or right of first refusal or something binding for our members. And so we've called it an MOU approach, the Memorandum of Understanding. I wanted to elaborate a little bit on what goes into these MOUs, which is that the MOUs kind of speak to the roles of the parties working together and what the ultimate outcome would be and when. And so through this MOU structure, we're trying to signal how we can help the developer with, say, letters of support for their transmission requests in the transmission planning process. And ultimately, in exchange, they provide rights of first refusal to our members or exclusivity. And so that's the model we've been developing and working with your staff. So it's more of a MOU with teeth, so to speak. And if we push so far as to try and ask for binding contracts with very explicit milestones, then there's probably not a commercial path forward for these projects just yet. Working with your members, it seems like there's broad support for this approach, and yet I hadn't had a chance to brief the board on it. And here's where we're at, is that we have these 3 MOUs, they're execution ready, but we haven't finalized them yet or signed. And so it's a good opportunity to check in with the board and have some discussion. So Philippe, I wanted, if you can, let's unmute Philippe so he's at least available to respond to any questions, because he's really been the main implementer managing this in conjunction with your staff, and I wanted him on hand to answer any questions. But with that, Chair Mitchell, I'd hand it back to you when we are here to answer any questions or listen as appropriate.
Yeah, so thanks so much. I know there was some discussion at the board retreat on this, so just appreciate you taking it back today. So any board member wanting to comment on this item? All right, Howard.
A quick clarifying question. The slide said artificial intelligence machine learning developer. Wondering if you can clarify what that really means, how that's relevant and applies to this case. That's one question. And my other question is, you also mentioned that the MOU has some more teeth to it. And so wondering if you can clarify kind of more substantively what that means. I think of MOUs as pretty light, contractual obligations on both parties. So to hear that there's more teeth in it, definitely interested in knowing how that translates through.
Yeah, Philippe, can you speak to the sort of loose deal structure with the artificial intelligence machine learning entity and why we think that's promising for California, and then also to the specific teeth components of the MOUs. Thank you.
Yeah, so this specific developer is a developer of traditional hydrothermal, geothermal assets. They are using AI and machine learning to identify previously undiscovered or untapped or undertapped geothermal resources to develop with a higher likelihood of success versus traditional methods for exploration and development. They have developed a portfolio of assets through earlier stages of development in Nevada and Utah. And through this MOU approach, they are granting us exclusivity to commence exploration work in California with a focus on our members' territories to identify potential geothermal resources that they could develop, which they will give us exclusivity to. So the goal here is really to leverage at least one of their sites in Nevada or Utah as an opportunity to gain some initial capacity that can support our members' near-term needs, but recognizing some of the intertie constraints that our members have and being able to import larger volumes, really focus that development into the California market where we face fewer constraints and where there's historically been greater barriers to development amongst the geothermal community due to higher costs of land, higher hurdles associated with permitting, lengthier timelines for interconnection. And so through this approach, they're committing to expending time and materials to doing this exploration work on our behalf and granting us this exclusivity. The MOU structure has both binding and non-binding components there too. Some of those binding components are, for example, this exclusivity right that we have for the term of the MOU plus 1 year after the termination of the MOU. We also have confidentiality provisions between us and the developer with respect to like what their exploration work entails. And in exchange, we have non-binding requirements on us to help provide support in terms of feedback on how they can extract greater market value of these resources, which benefits us ultimately in the CAISO markets, advising upon where there might be more feasible interconnection capacity based upon our understanding of the IRP and TPP processes, and helping identify where there's potential resource development possibilities that we can advocate for, or our members could, through those IRP and TPP processes to enable more capacity and deliverability to be unlocked on the system. There are other opportunities where we could engage. We're not bound to participate in those specifically, but we see that there is mutual benefit that comes from these types of ROFRs and exclusivity rights, where us assisting the developers through some of these stages to identify more feasible sites ultimately builds more supply that gives us the first right to be able to contract for that and encourage more geothermal development that ultimately should drive down the cost of geothermal for us and other LSCs in the market.
Okay, thanks, Philippe. Monica.
I think Jeff was next. I'll let him go.
Thanks.
Sorry about that. I didn't see which one went up first. Sorry about that, Jeff. Go ahead.
I want to applaud this progress. I think I just want to also share as a CCA that's been working toward large scale geothermal for 4 years now. Expect this to be a long journey and a bumpy ride. California is last on the list of developers from a risk standpoint. It's got the longest timelines and has the most challenging permitting environment, and it has the best rock in the United States. So we have by far the most thermal gradients, the highest thermal gradients in the United States that are close to the surface. And so we've learned a lot along the way. And if this all takes longer than you think, don't be surprised. And if this takes a larger strategy in Sacramento and in CAISO and at the PUC arguing that energy-only projects should be counted in the CPUC's reckoning, I want to join forces. One quick tidbit we just learned, or I just learned yesterday, that the CAISO's accounting for battery storage, for example, for summer peak reliability in RA is about 12,000 megawatts greater than the CPUC's accounting for battery storage. And one thought process that I'm going through is, could geothermal be identified by the PUC as being allowed as an energy-only resource within that gap between the agencies? In other words, could we allow up to 12,000 megawatts of geothermal or other clean firm to proceed on an energy-only basis because CAISO doesn't care, and then build the transmission after the fact? So I just wanted to share one of the thoughts we're exploring outside of CC Power, just to give a flavor of how deep we're having to reach to like get these projects started. And I'm excited, but it's a long game. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeff. Monica.
Yeah, I mean, SPCE is a big fan of geothermal, and we would love to have more geothermal in our portfolio. I think we signed one of the first contracts in the CalISO in a long time for a new geothermal project to be built. So we're definitely interested in geothermal. My concern with this approach is just what our expectations of what we're going to get at the end of it. Because to Jeff's point, this is development is different than a PPA, right? That already has a site, that already has interconnection, that already has done the drilling or the exploration for steam fields. That's very different than what this process looks like. And we could spend a lot of time and have a lot of expectations and end up with nothing at the end of this. And if that's clear, and we'll all agree that that's how we want to spend CC Power staff and resources and prioritize, then I can be convinced of that as well. I am just really kind of worried about how much time we're putting into this relative to other efforts. And so I want to express, I think this came up at the forum. I'm again, just seems like a long game and not something that's going to materialize in a year or 2 years, or maybe even 5 years. And then also a little bit worried about, how much kind of advocacy or hand-holding and or, lobbying that might come as a kind of expectation from the developer side in this MOU. And since I haven't seen an MOU myself, I really don't know what the elements of the MOU are, but maybe that's not the case.
Yeah, Alex or Philippe, could you speak to that? I think that's a good point. How much time do you expect, and what are the budget impacts of this?
Sure. Great points. I appreciate all the feedback. So this is one of numerous items being explored or managed on the project side of CC Power right now. We have other phase 2As. I'd say the bulk of this work has already occurred, which was the RFI, the shortlisting, and working with your members to identify projects of interest. Assuming we move forward with this approach, which we're close to doing, then things move to a simmer, and it's sort of more these milestone-based check-ins with the counterparty. So I think Director Padilla raises a good question of when and how will we know what this is going to yield. We do have the exclusivity in the ROFRs with some elements of capacity attached to them, so we have some visibility to what we could achieve. But given the sort of early stage nature of some of these projects, it's uncertain. And a good example is in one of them, there's high visibility to a near-term tranche, but then the secondary tranche has less visibility. So with one of the MOUs, we would sort of have good visibility to getting something near-term. And then after that, it becomes more uncertain. So I think, and we've been working with your staff, and my sense is that, we've been trying to balance what's reasonable and available to us commercially in the market right now, with the certainty, and as opposed to waiting and not knowing if we'll have these deals at all. So this is where we landed, and I still think it's a prudent approach, but there is risk, and it is different than a conventional PPA approach. I do think also, Chair Mitchell, just that the amount of time is not high. And in terms of the question about hand-holding or lobbying, we don't really have much of that planned right now. So each one of these deals is unique, and I'd be happy to share the MOU structure, and we have shared it with your teams, and we welcome further input on that in terms of what you think is the right level of commitment for each one of these opportunities.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, could you just detail the second part of the question there about just sharing the details about the MOU? Could you talk a little bit about that? You mentioned that it's shared with staff, but are you also planning on sharing the MOUs with the board, or?
Yeah, so our understanding is we're happy to share it, and we will. I think it's a great approach. Our understanding is we had it, the board doesn't approve MOUs, but if that's something the board wants to be in a position to do, we can certainly adjust our project plan for that.
I think what I'm hearing is, I share the same sentiments as Howard around, generally I think of an MOU as pretty non-binding and, like, okay, but, I would have the concern, well, easy to get out for both sides. And, are we actually going to, achieve our goal of, contracting and getting more geothermal ultimately constructed and built and in our portfolios. And, I'm willing to, explore this a little bit, but I think, it's really important to take the point of, let's make sure that we're not just getting diminishing returns here and we're spending a lot of time without, actually getting that value. So those are my thoughts on it. And I'm sorry, Robbie, you have your hand up as well, so we'll go to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think I echo yours and Monica's comments, and I've shared sort of my view previously that I think an MOU structure for sophisticated commercial entities dealing at an arm's length is really an inappropriate approach to these. I think something like a binding condition precedent agreement is more appropriate. I think there's a couple of primary risks. But before talking about those specifically, I think to both the point you're making and to the point that Director Padilla made, and I think it was in the staff presentation, that these projects have no commercial path forward but for the engagement of CC Power. That tells me that these projects aren't ready to be considered seriously. I think an MOU in a commercial arm's length agreement brings more risk than it does reward. The binding components that were detailed are all components thinking that the projects actually come online, and as they stand today, there's no commercial path forward. There's significant risk with MOUs in terms of understanding of scope, understanding of responsibilities, scope creep, budget creep. It's one more request for a letter. Can you attend this meeting? Can we do this financing structure so that we can get past this component that's constraining our ability? And it's just a pathway that leads to a lot of time that staff and the board invest in projects that may never be commercially viable. That doesn't mean that we as CCAs aren't constantly finding abilities and ways to try to move these things forward. But from my perspective, I think the MOU approach is not an approach that I would want to endorse. I'd like to see something that's a little bit more structured with concrete milestones, responsibilities clearly laid out, limiting our scope and involvement and risk associated with the projects and their development.
Thanks, Rob. Jeff.
Some issues have come up since I first remarked, so thanks for letting me comment a second time. I want to make a plea. Geothermal is not like anything else other than maybe offshore wind. And if you are looking for a straight ahead PPA, you're probably not going to find one in California. You might be able to find one in Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. But it will still require support on transmission upgrades. My view of this is we should schedule an item for a future meeting to go deep on this. I think geothermal is probably half as hard as offshore wind and is, in our estimation, about 7 times the value per megawatt of solar. It's incredibly valuable resource. Our geo is so far in the money that it's making us look great. And And I would argue like this is really valuable to go deep. So a little bit of a contradiction to our general manager's comments. I would love to see if we could make the case that this agency should go big on geothermal and try and put in the hours and the effort to prove this resource up. I think this is a long game for me. I'm expecting that we won't finish our 600 megawatts for at least 20 years. I'm betting we only have shovels in the ground starting in about 4 years. So we've already been at it for 4. So I have no like illusions about it, but maybe for today, rather than trying to reach any new conclusions, I would just ask that maybe we could schedule a time to spend a whole hour or an hour and a half really talking about some of the ecosystem of geothermal in California and some of the barriers. We've written a number of white papers on the topic. We've got a whole team who works on nothing but geothermal. I'd love to invite the leader of that team in to like share some learnings and see if we might build a little more of a consensus around it. Because I see this as really valuable, but it's not a walk in the park. Thanks.
I see. Okay, Monica, and then Beth.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff, I understand that geothermal is different than any other resource in development, and it requires much more lead time and is riskier. Like, I don't need to be explained that. I understand that. I think I tend to be like, what is CC Power kind of role in this in the development? And I share the sentiments that Rob said. An MOU may not be the way to do this, right? If we really want to make this be something that's real, I think we have to go beyond that. And I also, quite frankly, and I know this is not popular, but I believe that the CPE has a role to play in geothermal in this state. And I think that they've recognized that. And I worry that because we don't have a PCIA mechanism or ability to recover stranded costs, and geothermal is very expensive, that if I take on an aggressive approach to geothermal at the rates that they're being priced at today, that I'm going to end up with a stranded asset. And so that's my concern. So it's not just about I love geothermal, don't get me wrong. It's just about what is right for my CCA, the collection of CCAs, and then what is the state going to do here too. So I welcome that discussion as well.
Great. Okay, Beth.
Yeah, I've really appreciated all the discussion and given me a lot to think about. I think I kind of came into this very much in favor of the MOU process. I'm not at all wed to that being the tool. So if there's some other vehicle, I would say is like a point of process. I do feel a little uncomfortable if we're entering into that and the board doesn't typically see those. If that's what I heard was said, that we would be like entering into those with just sort of staff, doing that was sort of our overall blessing. I'd love to, have that opportunity to look closer. And again, if it's not an MOU, if it's a different type of vehicle that makes more sense to get what we need out of it, I'd be really open to that too. I do appreciate what I think is the role CC Power can play in advancing this. I feel like it's something, for our little CCA that we have a lot of interest in and don't have sort of the capacity to go it alone. So, we really look to this group as being that vehicle for us as well. So just wanted to throw that out there. That's it for me. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. Howard.
I just wanted to share my quick perspective, which is I see both sides of this issue. On the one hand, I don't see MOUs as a contracting structure that's a particularly effective way to advance these efforts. But I also agree with Jeff's perspective that geothermal is a long game. We need to find and advance more clean, firm technologies. And I think we have a role to play there. And on the heels of our strategic planning refresh, we talked about merging technologies, and we talked a little bit about how do we want to approach that and what do we want to prioritize. And I think that's an open question. So my feedback on this topic is that I think we need to have more dialogue at the CC Power staff and board level of understanding how do we want to play a role in advancing technologies. And so I think based on this discussion, it's not that clear on how we best prioritize our time and efforts and what is CC Power's role. And I think my view is just a caution on what the MOU structure is really doing. Is it a capitalized entity we're even contracting with if they're providing us exclusivity of some form? And what are we giving up? Is it our time? Is it our intelligence in terms of pricing targets and things like that? Is it advocacy work, or is it nothing? And if it's nothing, I tend to not think that we're getting anything of value in exchange. So if we're going to get something of value in exchange, we better be giving something of value in exchange. And so then I think there probably is further dialogue that's necessary so that there's agreement amongst this group of, is that what we want to prioritize? Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of things that I think CC Power can focus on, given our recent dialogue. And I think that's probably an area that we need to have a little bit more alignment and discussion. So that's my view.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. Barbara and then Mitch.
Thank you. So I think I'm hearing a lot of different views here. I think the conversation is good. I'm interested in taking Jeff up, or Sonoma Clean Power up, on their offer to share the knowledge they've accumulated. So I'd encourage some method for making that happen. Jeff, happy to work with you on that, independent of CC Power, if that's the better road to take. And I'm also, as I listen to this dialogue, though, wondering, as the largest procurers now, if we don't step up to do this kind of exploration work using some sort of vehicle, don't know what you want to name it, who will? I recognize that it doesn't have to be through CC Power, but if not, then through what method? So I do want us to spend more time thinking about this and talking about this, but I see I feel a sense of responsibility as load serving entities to do something. Thank you.
Thanks, Barb. Mitch.
Yeah, I tend to agree with Barb's comments. I recognize that there's a lot more to understand around this, and I think the term MOU may be the right term to be using here, but I would say that this, and I don't want to get out ahead of the actual adoption of the strategic plan, but this just kind of seems like almost exactly what at least I was thinking of when we were talking about that during the board forum, about difficult things to do and how we go about doing those things. And so for me, this seems like a reasonable first step in that direction. It probably isn't the final form of what it's going to look like. I guess I take Jeff at his word that we need to be playing the long game and thinking about, we're around for the next 30 or 40 or 50 years. And what is this, what kind of direction does this push us in? So I'm generally supportive of the work that staff has done at this point, with the understanding that more dialogue needs to be sort of developed around this. But I also don't want to stand in the way as a board of the work that staff has initiated and the discussions and the relationships they're starting to build. So I want to understand how we thread that needle, and probably today we're not going to solve that, but interested in learning more.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. And thanks everyone for the discussion. Just as a reminder, this is just a discussion item, no voting today. But I think what I'm hearing is a lot of interest in a follow-up discussion. And so, General Manager, if you could work with the officers on calendaring that, whether that's a deeper dive as Jeff suggested, or one thing I'm hearing a lot of support for is just understanding the details of an MOU and maybe other contracting structures that we might look at in addition to this. And, to some of Howard and Monica's points, how much staff time, what are the budget impacts, and what we're getting out of it, and looking at that menu of options. So I think more to come, but I think this was a good discussion today to start somewhere. Okay, and with that, I'm going to go to public comment unless there's any further discussion. And I'm not seeing any, so we'll go over to public comment. Any member of the public wanting to comment on this item? You can raise your hand. Okay, I'm not seeing any. So we are on to item 6E, which is the general manager report. So I will pass it back to you, Alex.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for the great discussion on that. I hear you. It's nice to have a board that has so much experience, and so this is great. And also, please, when you have time, check in with your staff, because we have been working pretty collaboratively with your teams and trying to figure this out as best we can. There's still plenty of time to evolve this. And the last thing to close that out is it's still a 2A. So, in some ways it's kind of the first stage of pursuing binding opportunities, and we recognize that as things move forward, parties may not want to move to a 2B. Given that, I still think there's room for improvement and a chance for us to socialize more information, which we will do. Okay, let me jump into the GM report now, and this will be fairly quick. First, important updates are on the project. So Tumbleweed was originally supposed to COD in April of 2026, and our contract date was concurrent with that. But within the contract, they had an opportunity to slip the schedule back a little bit, basically in case they had to start our contract later for when the unit would have resource adequacy and be registered in monthly plans. So they have now done that. So the actual storage contract with us will start June 1st, even though the unit's still going to come online April 15th. And that way they'll be able to provide full RA to us right when the contract starts. And this was all within the allowances in the contract itself. So I'm happy to field any questions on that, but your teams participating in this project have been looped into that. And since it was allowable per the contract, this is probably just the result we're going to have to work with. The other updates on Tumbleweed are that our scheduling coordinator registration is now complete. So we're advancing the sort of implementation steps, and there's a bunch of work midstream now on outage management, resource adequacy, the new resource implementation and transfer procedures. We also had a positive outcome where the RA year ahead filings were submitted and accepted. So we've been working with members on feeding them information so they can incorporate it into their RA planning. And then two other updates on the contracting side. We have an optimization vendor agreement maturing. The members were strongly in favor of this vendor, and we're also looking at how members may use our current contracting process with them to piggyback on that and receive their own economies of scale and access to that vendor. So we're teeing that up. We're calling that the master construct because we've used that term in the past. That the contractual language is still being finalized, and we know we have one member who will probably want to take advantage of that. And then on the scheduling coordinator side, the agreement negotiations are processing, and similarly, there's some members may want to have access to the scheduling coordinator for their own purposes, and so we're looking at whether they do their own contract or we do a side agreement. In this case, it doesn't seem like a single master services contract would work. And so we're, I'd say lightly working with the counterparty on having this side agreement to help members have access and get bulk discounts, which would help everybody. So that's the Tumbleweed update. And here's the latest picture of it. You can see that the storage containers are out and the site's fairly developed. And we're looking forward to a potential ribbon cutting in the spring, and we'll try and get that on everybody's calendars as soon as possible. And we're confirming this, but this may be the first 8-hour battery that's going to be operating in the CAISO. There are other 8-hour storage units, but this may be the first 8-hour battery following the CPUC's order. So kind of neat if that's the case. And this is really your resource. So if you want to use the ribbon cutting for any of your own celebrations, we'd support that. Okay. Okay. And then moving on to Fish Lake, just a sort of ministerial update that one of the letters of credit was updated and is in place for another year. And we have an obligation to report that. So we're reporting that to you now. Moving on, this goes back a while. Last year, we worked on this RA optimization study to see if having an optimization tool for members would be valuable. It seemed like a potential candidate for joint action. And the studies showed that, yes, there could be value here, but the biggest value given the portfolio of our potentially participating members would be if hourly load obligation trades were allowed. You probably recall that the Cal CCA was suggesting that hourly load trading obligation be allowed in RA at the CPUC. The CPUC declined, and so this work hasn't moved forward. But as part of closing out that project, working with the consultant, we were having a report developed to memorialize the findings. Those findings were that even with 8 members participating in a relatively similar geographic footprint, there was millions of dollars in saving over just 5 summer months. And if, in theory, if you added more territory, or particularly more north-south territory or diversification, you'd have more value unlocked. The value really did come from hourly load trading obligation, though. And if you tried to just work within the limits of the current RA program where you can trade resources in a more blocky way, you didn't get as much value. It also showed that just using members' portfolios, you could achieve compliance in 3 of the 5 months where there might be deficiencies, just based on some of the long-term portfolios and not considering all the short-term contracts many of you have. So that was another helpful sign that there's value here. And lastly, we addressed in the study some of the challenges for how this would implement and work. A specific example was, what would this mean for gas units under contract versus battery energy storage? And we worked through that, and there's some content on that in the report. So our plan is just to wrap this up. We're going to post the report, and we have been in contact with Cal CCA, who is aware that CPUC may be looking at or receiving information on the value of hourly load trading obligations in the coming months. And so by posting it on our website or publishing it, it would be available to parties to use, however, and probably no further action from us on this near term. So that's the update on the RA optimization tool. And then we'll move on to, I think, invoicing. Yes, project account balance statements. So many of you received your project account balance statements from June 30th. The way these work is that at the end of each quarter, we can provide an update on specifically what your project dollars were spent on and how much you have remaining in any project funds you may have with CC Power. Now that fiscal year 24-25 is closed, we've circulated the PABs that had the end of year balances, and those end of year balances, since they're part of the project, essentially effectively carry over to reduce any further needs for funds or to be used for those projects. And so given that, we're now looking at invoicing for the remaining amount due for projects for the current year, but there's a couple nuances here. So we are the budget approved, funds for operating projects. There's already some of your money in those project accounts, so we won't need the full amount that's authorized, and we'll be invoicing for less than that. And then in some cases, if there's a terminated project, then all of the funds left in that account would be refunded back to you. And the only thing holding that up is we just need to make sure that all the expenses are assigned to projects as appropriate. That's one of our projects was terminated, and the spending on that project ended in August. So the last thing we're doing there is just making sure that any expenses from July and August are attributed to that project, and then that the project account balance remaining project account balance would be refunded to members. And then one other thing to note is that if a project is going to become operational, it may have unique working capital needs. And so for some projects, we can say, hey, it's not coming online, and so we'll invoice you for the operating needs for the year. But in some cases, it may be coming online and there could be large amounts of working capital that need to be infused into that project account. We don't want to seed that working capital too soon, because then we'd be really sitting on a lot of money from members. And so in the cases where a project is going to come online, really the model is that we wait until we're about 3 months out from the project coming online, and that's when we see the material amount of working capital needed. This structure is codified in our project agreements with members already. And so I just know on the first time around, it can be a little confusing to see these small invoices and then a larger invoice, but it's all sort of procurement costs for members. And that's the background that's happening here. And at any time, your project account balance statements should be able to give you and your teams a clear sense of how much of your money is sitting with that project and what it's being spent on. Additionally, I think for the Tumbleweed project, which is the first project to come online next year, we have an operations advisory subcommittee where we're working with a lot of your teams on the actual operations side of these projects, and that's going really well. And I'm thankful for all of your team staff helping us set up and protocolize all of this work in ways that members feel is transparent and gives them the appropriate amount of control. Okay, and then lastly, just wanted to disclose under the GM authorization for signing contracts. There's one contract in October. This in the budget, we approved some phase 1 work to develop and improve the understanding of transmission for members. And so we've signed an agreement with Z Global. We were within the budget amount, and just wanted to disclose that. And that work's now underway. And a lot of your staff will be invited to training presentations on that to help them assess it. And then eventually this could inform CC Power joint action ideas that we look at on behalf of members. So Chair Mitchell, that's the end of my GM update, and I appreciate the chance to brief everyone. I'd welcome any questions.
Yeah, thanks, General Manager. Any questions or discussion on the GM report? Okay, with that, I will go to public comment. Any member of the public wanting to comment on the GM report? All right, I'm not hearing any, so we're on to our last item, which is discussion of any individual member items. Yeah, Jeff.
I just wanted to flag, yesterday, some of the good staff over at Peninsula flagged a potential concern, at least in PG&E territory, that the financial security requirement, the FSR, could jump higher than expected in 2026 and kind of disproportionate to the increase in the PCIA. I don't have any details on that yet, but I just wanted to flag if they've uncovered something, I'm going to direct my team to look into it and just encourage others to take a peek, and so that there's no surprises. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Any other discussion items by individual members? Okay, well, with that, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone.